Welcome to the Hudson Report. Today we're starting off a new series we're calling Biblical Legends and Figures. Today we're going to talk about the Behemoth and the Leviathan as mentioned by God to Job. And we're also going to be looking at the different cases where the Leviathan and the Behemoth was mentioned in different biblical texts.
Yes, absolutely. What makes it a bit different than other people do it, we are mostly looking out of the Bible, although both of us did do a bit of research outside of the Bible because there's really not much mentioned in the Bible about it. So we're going to try and make an assumption and try and get as much information as we can from the Bible and see what we can get to.
The problem is in our research, we found a lot of weird stuff. Let's call it what it is. It's really a bunch of weird stuff. And they derive a lot of, they get a lot of ideas or basic theories on legends and mythological things of other cultures and other legends and religions. And there is quite a few strange stuff. So we will be kind of mentioning those stuff, but we will be looking, as Klaus said, at the Bible, what the Bible says specifically about it.
Yeah, unfortunately, some of it was a bit unsettling, some of the research. So if it seems that way to you, don't worry too much about it because not everything is as clear as it might be with some of the previous stuff we did. So we are also not 100% sure of all the information, as some of it is not so clear.
We will also be looking at different versions of the Bible. Specifically, what versions will we be looking at? Translations.
As in previous podcasts we did as well, Yaku mostly does his research out of the King James version. I do most of my research out of the English Standard Version. I did look at a few other versions as well, but mostly I got my research from the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. And I'll get a bit more to some of the translations out of the Septuagint.
Actually, quickly tell me, because we saw this in our research, just for interest's sake, what is the Behemoth and the Leviathan called in the Septuagint?
So the direct translation in the Septuagint for Behemoth is Thyria, which can be roughly translated to beasts or something like that, something in that area.
A land-dwelling beast.
A land-dwelling beast mostly, where Leviathan, the Greek translation, and this is quite funny, is Drakonta, which is quite clearly, you can hear a dragon type, probably something with scales, perhaps something that can fly, or even something that comes out of the sea.
You will note that in different parts of the Bible and different versions of the Bible, they use Leviathan and dragon interchangeably. So in the end, we will be looking at that, but it's they make it kind of clear that they mean the same thing with this, but there are also some kinds of differences maybe sometimes.
So let's perhaps get to Job then. We have looked at some other verses in the Psalms as well, and Isaiah and so on, but I think most of it comes out of Job. So to get a bit of background on Job, we're not sure when it was written.
As with most of the Bible.
As with a lot of other places as well. But the thing about Job is they have wondered if perhaps Moses wrote it, perhaps Job himself wrote it.
The problem with Moses is that Job is said to maybe have lived 300 years after Moses.
Yeah,
it's very strange.
It's a strange thing. The timelines doesn't quite match up exactly. Perhaps they thought that Job might have lived much earlier than they thought, or perhaps he was in the exile, in the Babylonian exile. So it's quite strange to feel. So the timeline says he's living somewhere 700 to 400 before Christ, which makes it a rough 300 years.
That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Also, isn't it said, some of our sources said that Job is the first ever written, the oldest written book of the Bible?
It is believed that it was the first written book, which also begs the question of who wrote it.
Yes.
And once again, when did Job live? So we don't know all of these information. Only thing that we know is that he was quite a wealthy man. if we look at if he was living in Israel at that time, it was probably his farms must have been in quite a good area with good growth and good crops, which goes down to sort of a triangular area in Yob around the river, that area where plants grew quite well and farms could grow
Could
quite
it be
well.
maybe around the Jordan? Because the Jordan is actually mentioned. We will be seeing this in this section.
Yes, I think so.
The Jordan is rich, plant life rich.
Yes. I think it must have been in that area. It's the part that would make sense. So I doubt it was like in a deserted place, because he was a wealthy man. It wouldn't make much sense. So that's pretty much the information we have about Job.
Quickly give me background about the book of Job. What happened in there? Just an intro into getting to this point, because we're going to speak of Job 40 and 41. So that's already a little into the book already. What happened before that? Just basically.
Okay, so Job started out with pretty much a conversation between God and Satan, where Satan wanted to give a certain test to Job and say that if he took certain things away, Job wouldn't be so trustworthy of God and wouldn't be such a good disciple of God. And God says, but it's not true. Job is a true believer, and he's not just someone that puts his trust in belongings and things that he have, but he truly loves God. And then this whole thing starts about Job, him starting to get sick and starting to lose some of his belongings, starting to lose some of his family members, his children, things like that. And Job asked all these questions to some of his friends. I think there's specifically 3 friends that he argues with throughout the book. And these friends give their theories about, but God has a meaning with this, and but God is meant to do this in your life and do that in your life. I'm not going to go.
But Job keeps rebuttaling and saying,
keeps going back and saying, but I'm not a bad person, and these things didn't happen to me as
as a sinner.
There must be something else, and eventually God says as well that it didn't happen to Job because he was a bad person, but these things happen for a reason that's not quite
okay. So God actually came down and he spoke to Job. Correct.
That's true.
All right, that's basically where we're getting to now, and he mentions the Behemoth and the Leviathan.
Yes.
And so I think we'll actually jump into what is said about the Behemoth first. I'll quickly read up.
Job 40.
Job 40 verse 15 to 24. Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox. Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as pieces. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of the God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees, in the coverts of the reed and fence. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes. His nose pierceth through snares.
Okay, so before we get to all the detail, because that's a lot of detail about a single creature, I mean, but before we get into that, let's get to some of the theories. Some identities people have tried to describe the behemoth. It might be mythological creature, or might even be something as an elephant or a hippopotamus or a rhinoceros or a buffalo, something like that. Others say that metaphorically it's a name used for a extremely large, powerful entity, even maybe more like a nation rather than a creature, but a powerful something. Which is quite hard to really explain, because there's so much detail in this about the strength of it, the bones, even I think around the scales and things like that. I mean, it's so hard to imagine that all of this just gets down to a strong entity.
What it comes down to for me with this, and we will also be speaking about the Leviathan, is that these beasts are so large, powerful, strong that it's difficult for humans to kill these beasts. And so, if we're speaking maybe of it's a metaphor for a large nation, yes, for let's maybe speak of the Israelites, it would have been difficult for them to fight against a big nation, a very big, strong nation, but they can pierce the nation, they can fight the nation, they can defeat it. It is possible. This is more, these beasts are so large, so strong that only really its creator, only really God can destroy these creatures. And the Bible specifically talks about this, especially in Job 41.
So we're already sort of moving away from a metaphorical meaning of it.
So.
I know there's some other explanations that they say that the sea is a link to chaos and to sin and things like that, and the creature of the sea is might be the Leviathan at a later stage. We'll read about that in a moment, and we're already sort of getting an idea that it's not so metaphorical as one might think.
The thing is, this is basically really straightforward for me, because why would there be said like he moves his tail like a cedar? All right, it's a bit visual, it's a bit imagery, but it says like this is a creature. He has a tail like this. He is strong like this.
He eats grass.
He eats grass like an ox. He can drink a lot of water. That's something like you would describe a lion or something today. You would say, oh, it can do these things. It's not these big giant imageries like, oh, he goes through the heavens and he eats the moon, and it's not something crazy like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get in these kinds of stories something really bigger. These are more straightforward for me. It's not really like a parable. It's more, here is this creature. God says, I can control these creatures. I created these creatures and I can slay these creatures, and you can't as a human. Why would you question me?
So give us an idea. Are we looking at like a mythological creature, like, I don't know, a dragon or something out of a book? Or are we looking at something that perhaps is not on Earth today?
Well, the first thing you can think of, that a lot of myths in a lot of cultures, you can say, are based on something. They take something, a creature that existed back then or might even exist now, and they just kind of changed it up and made it like, oh, here's this big mythical creature. Now, in this, I don't believe it's a mythical creature. I do not believe, because God specifically says, he talks about these two creatures and he says, these creatures. He talks about it as if, he doesn't say, oh, there are these kinds of creatures and you can imagine it. He says, Job knows about these creatures.
And why would God refer to a mythical creature? It doesn't quite make sense.
Job has to have seen these creatures. These creatures needed to live between them. There had to be enough of them, not just one or two, because in the entire world, one or two, how is Job going to know about them, having seen these things and know, oh, it's so difficult to kill these things? There needed to have to be a few of these creatures back then. So we need to start looking back. And we cannot say the big theories today are hippopotamus and an elephant.
And perhaps a crocodile.
You said earlier, Klaus used the word in our research, absurd.
Yeah.
It's absurd to believe it can be any of those three creatures. When you look at it, it's these giant creatures. My big thing about it is, he can drink the whole Jordan. The Jordan is a massive river. Back then, gigantic river. And he can drink enough of that, would be able to drink enough of that it looks like, oh, he drank the entire river. There is no way that a hippopotamus or an elephant can drink that much. And the size of the thing, there's just a lot that doesn't make sense. So I don't believe it's a creature that exists today. The elephant, get these big-sized elephants. They're basically the biggest animals on Earth. Can you think of something bigger than an elephant? I don't believe.
Only sea creatures, but
yes,
the behemoth is.
The behemoth is said to have, eateth grass as an ox, so he has to live on. Yeah. So no, there's not really anything that big that walks on the earth. So back then there needed to be something different. And if you look at the Bible timeline, if you follow the Bible timeline and believe the earth is 6 or 7 or 8,000 years old. There's a lot to debate about that. It's also something we will be talking about at some point. But if you look at it like that, if you look at everything in the context of the Bible, and we know about big, gigantic creatures, call it what you will, but creatures that have become extinct today.
Dinosaurs, whatever it may be.
There's a lot of names for different creatures, and we do have proof of them that they did exist. And there is nothing to say that in the time of Job, those creatures didn't exist. They could have existed. They could have walked the earth amongst Job, and it was such a normal thing that they didn't even make something big about it. Just God came and said, "Oh, here are these creatures. They're so big and strong that you can't defeat them, but I can." But it's not like, "Oh, these are weird. It's a weird thing that you never see or something." It's a normal thing. Okay. So my theory on that would be it's some kind of extinct creature we don't have today. There is one thing they call, let me actually quickly look at it, the sauropoda or sauropods. It's a gigantic creature. It's like you get the brontosaurus. The brontosaurus is in modern media very well known, but the sauropoda is so much bigger than this. It's something that a few human people will not simply be able to spear or kill or something like that. So you can maybe look at that.
So maybe you can describe to us, or because this is the first time I've heard of it, how would a sauropoda look like?
Well, actually, if you look at the definition that's given, just a plain simple definition, I'll quickly read it here. The sauropoda is described as they had very long necks, long tails, small heads relative to their body, and 4 thick pillar-like legs. Obviously, also they ate grass, plants. They were herbivores, and they had very thick skin, very tall, very big. They were very, very strong creatures. Then now let's look at what they actually say in the Bible. A few things they say in the Bible in Job. So the Bible describes the behemoth as eateth grass like an ox. So he was a herbivore. His strength is in his loins and his belly, which is basically the mid and lower section. That's where his strength is. So a sauropoda was big around the belly, big and strong. That's where his strength lied. Then he moveth his tail like a cedar. It's just basically the way it swings. It's slow. It's like a big tree almost swinging. When you look at in films, maybe dinosaurs, these big giant dinosaurs, it looked like these big tails swinging slowly. Okay. So just a big thing. And then the sinews of his stones are wrapped together. He has basically thick legs, thick bones. It basically comes down to his bones are thick and strong. And then obviously lastly, he drinketh up a river, which means he was just massive in size. So if you look at the sauropoda, or maybe even a brontosaurus or something like that, or a diplosaurus, I think is the other one, big creatures that are more likely to be a behemoth than an elephant, because an elephant isn't that strong. It can drink up a river. You can kill a elephant if you really want to. These are like, these creatures, a behemoth is very difficult to kill.
Okay, gives me a good idea. Well, this actually makes me quite excited for the next part of the Leviathan. So perhaps we can go to...
Yes, the behemoth is actually very short. The Job doesn't talk that much.
And it's the only verse in the Bible we have about the behemoth, which makes it quite difficult to get much more information on it. The Leviathan, we have a few verses that refers to it. Obviously, the most referred to in Job 41, I believe. Yes. And there's quite an explanation of it. We'll refer to the other verses as well.
Yes, we also have twice in Psalm they talk about it. So it's Psalm 74 and 104. And then in Isaiah, they also talk about it.
Yes, and I found another one in Amos, which it wasn't called the Leviathan in either the ESV or the King James Version. But I found the reference through the Septuagint, which use exactly the same word as in Job as in Psalm and Isaiah. So that referral to the dragon kind creature was also used in Amos, but we'll get to that in a moment.
Yes, so I think we already mentioned it. The word dragon and the word Leviathan is used interchangeably. Yeah. Something I would like to say, the different verses in the Bible that it's used, the different books, there's quite a lot of distance, year distance and story distance between the book of Job and the book of Psalms. Uh, do we know in what time Psalms was written? Do you know?
Well, it's quite a
Also difficult.
no, it's quite a wide range from different psalms, so I don't think we'll get too much into that right now.
All right, but just the thing is, there you will see differences between Job and what is said in Psalm, but we will be getting to that. So let's actually quickly read what is said in Job 41. Now, this is quite a long one, so stick with us. So it's still God talking to Job, and he says, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook, or his tongue with a cord, which thou lettest down? Canst thou put an hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as with a bird? Or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thine hand upon him, remember the battle, do no more. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? Who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. Who can discover the face of his garments, or who can come to him with his double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride, shut up together as with a closed seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined to one another. They stick together, that they cannot be sundered. By the neesings a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of seething pots of cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. In his neck remaineth strength, and sorrow is turned into joy before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together, they are firm in themselves, they cannot be moved. His heart is as firm as a stone, yea, as hard as a piece of the nether millstone. When he raiseth up himself, the mighty are afraid, by reason of breakings they purify themselves. The sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold, the spear, the dart, nor the habergeon. He esteemeth iron as straw, and brass as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee, slingstones are turned with him into stubble. Darts are counted as stubble. He laugheth at the shaking of a spear, sharp stones are under him. He spreadeth sharp-pointed things upon the mire. He maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. He maketh a path to shine after him. One would think the deep to be hoary. Upon earth there is not his like, who is made without fear. He beholdeth all high things. He is a king over all the children of pride.
Okay, so that is quite a long explanation of something that doesn't quite seem so clear to us of any creatures we have at the moment. But we already see a lot of similarities between the Leviathan and the Behemoth, and some things that are not so clear between the two. But before we get to the whole explanation of that, let's just get to the idea of where we are in Job at the moment. So once again, Job was talking about all his illnesses that he got, and his children that he lost, and he was questioning God in a certain sense, but not swearing God, because he never actually swore towards God, but he in a certain sense cursed the day that he was born and things like that, rather
Curse his
than
own life. All right.
rather than cursing God, which makes
I kind of get that. I kind of have empathy for him sometimes. It gets difficult. That's maybe an important thing about Job. That
an important message.
He has
as
feelings
well.
that most of us sometimes can maybe have
At some
yes.
stage in our life, yeah. So at this point, God explains to Job that he doesn't need to answer him. Why? Because God is sovereign.
What does sovereign actually mean?
Um,
I think God above God, he's the king above kings. He is sovereign, basically means he's the leader of all leaders.
he's almighty. He has all the power. He can be anywhere at any
All
time.
the knowledge, yes.
All the knowledge,
Omnipresence.
omnipotence,
Omnipotence, yes. All
yes.
right. Thank you.
So what God says here is that I made these creatures, and who are you to question what my reason is for things being the way it is? Can you do anything to these creatures? So this is the idea we get. God pretty much says, and this gives us an idea already. This is a creature that God created. He says this. It is not something that appeared out of somewhere, or someone that Satan himself created, or anything like that.
This creature doesn't live in heaven and suddenly came to earth, or lives under the ground.
No.
It's something that's on earth.
Nothing like that.
And so the last part is Job 41 verse 34. It says, he is king over all the he is a king over all the children of pride. So basically all that has been mentioned, everything on earth.
So the
is
children
bigger.
of pride is just the specific in the translation in the King James version. Other translations might say of all these things, or everything that we read now, he's the king of all these things, or he holds control over all these things, that sort of thing.
So it's just a mighty, big, strong creature. That's
Yes.
what it comes down to. Yes.
And we see some similarities here with, and people try to explain out of this creatures that we know right now. We see similarities of like a hippopotamus or even a crocodile.
The crocodile is used with a leviathan. Yes.
Yes. So, and you can see some similarities, like the toughness of the skin,
The
scales, things like that. But there are very important things that I think is way out that we don't see, and we get a few verses on that. Maybe you can just touch on that for a moment.
Something that I want to talk about. I don't think it's something that walks on earth. I think it's something that has to fly. The reason I say this, and this is a bit of interpretation, so know that we are just interpreting this. It says, wilt thou play with him as with a bird? And then it goes on, or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? But it specifically says a bird. You play with a bird. When you think you play with an animal, back then it had to be the same. We know they had things like dogs and stuff like that. They had domesticated cats. For example, Egypt, long before that, had domesticated cats. You play with these domesticated animals. Sure, you can play with a bird, but why didn't God say like a dog or like a lizard, or I don't know, something else?
So it's not
why
possible,
specifically bird?
Not quite possible to bind that animal, whatever it may be, to the ground as it might be able to fly.
But specifically, it sounds like it's something that might be able to fly. And yes, it says you cannot bind him. So obviously, it's a big creature. It's very tough.
It already gives me the idea of a dragon coming up again.
And again, we are talking about the Leviathan, and the word dragon is used interchangeably. What's the word in Greek again that they originally used?
Draconta.
Draconta. Basically, Draco, it's a dragon. All right, so I think there's actually a few more things. Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? What this basically says for me is they capture the animal, they slay the animal, and like they would with an ox. They mentioned an ox earlier. Let's talk about it again with the ox, or any kind of springbok, maybe, I don't know, sheep, whatever. It's not a creature. They slay, they butcher, and they can eat of, and the merchants can sell this thing. This is a creature they can't capture, they can't bind it, they can't just make it for food to eat. It does say somewhere that God actually can slay this creature, and that he giveth the meat then to humans. But that's in a different part. I think we'll get to that. Then something that also says that this Leviathan, this dragon, is a very fierce, strong creature. At multiple points, it's mentioned that you cannot kill it with this thing or with this thing. So they also say, Job 41, verse 26 to 28, the sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold. So you cannot really kill this thing with a sword or pierce it with a sword. The spear, the dart, the habergeon. That's a difficult word. I'm so sorry, guys. Uh, he esteemeth iron as straw. So he esteemeth iron as straw. Iron is, back then, it was basically one of the strongest metals they could have, and it's like straw to him, like a fabric almost. It's soft, it's bendy, it's nothing to this big creature. And brass as rotten wood. If you step on rotten wood, it's gonna break. It's nothing to him. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned with him into stubble. So I think an elephant, the biggest elephant on earth today, if you get a bunch of people together with a bunch of spears, I mean 10, 20, 30 people with spears, and you put up traps, you will be able to capture that elephant. You will be able to, elephants are tameable, and you will be able to kill an elephant or a hippopotamus. And of course, they're talking about modern theories are talking about crocodile.
Yeah.
All of these are, you can capture them, you can kill them.
Crocodile Dundee, come on.
Yeah. This creature is something that mankind cannot just kill. Even if you are a group of people, you cannot pierce this thing. It talks about his scales. Actually, in Job 41, verse 15, his scales are his pride, shut up together as with a closed seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined to one another. They stick together that they cannot be sundered. All right, so with any kind of lizard or any kind of crocodile or something like that, obviously they have scales. The scales are together. But these are scales that they are so thick, they are so strong, they are so close together that not even metal, a sword or iron or something can pierce it. Yeah. All right. Anything you want to add to that?
No, it's interesting that some similarities you can pull through to like a crocodile and things like that. So I can see
if you squint your eyes and you turn your head a little, you can maybe see it.
It's
a bit far-fetched.
It doesn't help you get like 3 out of 8 of the out of his characteristics. Doesn't quite do the thing for me. I mean, you can't.
It's like when you talk about a creature, you saw it has a nose, it has legs, it can speak, it has 7 tentacles and 4 horns.
Or
you can't say it's a human.
Explain a person. It's like, hey, she's like, hey, hi, dark hair. She's got a nose, and yeah, it doesn't quite. That's pretty much half of the population.
So here is where it totally just goes away from a crocodile or anything on Earth. All right, this part, and some people may say it's simile or metaphor or whatever. He breathes fire. Now, it's not just something that's said in passing. Or it's not just like, oh, he breathes fire and then it goes on. It's just not like a simple thing you can look over. There are, let me see, is it 3 verses? 3 long verses that actually go into this creature, the Leviathan, can breathe fire. It goes into very specifics about it. The Bible and God isn't not just going to mention something that is a metaphor or something and speak so deeply into it without saying, hey, it's like this. It doesn't say it's like this. It says it is this. The Leviathan can do this. So actually, I'm going to read it quickly. By his neesings a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. So it just goes on that in these, 4 verses, basically, very in depth, he breathes fire. Do you know of a creature today that breathes fire?
My mother, when she's very angry. No, sure.
Shots fired.
This is quite interesting. I already start getting pictures of this mythical creature that breathes fire, dragons, things like that. But it begs the question of perhaps creatures that's not on Earth anymore. Once again, I'm not sure.
So the thing is, we also in our research found the weirdest theories. People have the strangest theories around this. So there's like a bug. Not even sure what the bug's name is because it was just so absurd for me. But it lets out a kind of gas and it can spark and it can flame up or something. But it doesn't even let this gas out of his mouth or his nostril, like this is said. And it's not like he breathes fire. It's a type of toxic gas, and it's a small little bug. It's not. That's a very stupid theory for me. It doesn't fit with anything that is said here about the Leviathan.
Yeah, and the thing about this is not someone that says this. This is God that says this to Job. So it gives a whole lot of questions to me about these creatures and things. So
And we can also look like we have proof that dinosaurs existed. We have bones dug up, and there were these giant creatures. We call it dinosaurs today. Call it what you want to, but there are these things, and it's not that far fetched to say, oh, there was this big thing that could fly like a dragon and that can breathe fire, because fire is just letting out gas and spark maybe with his teeth or something. There are ways to explain this that it can be something like this. And like I said, there is proof about dinosaurs. Why not dragons? All right. So I just believe we move so far away from crocodiles or anything like a whale. I just think we're so far removed from that. It's just so simplistic to think about it like that. So actually, do you think, let's go on to Psalm? Do you have something you want to say about that maybe?
Perhaps you can read it to us, and I'll.
So yeah, it's Psalm 74, verse 13 to 14. It's very different for me here. Please listen to how differently it's described when they talk about it here. And as a preface, I would like to say, for the first time, they call it the Leviathan a dragon. All right. In Job, it wasn't called a dragon. It's just called a Leviathan. Here, it's actually called a dragon. So, thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of the Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. So yes, again, first, the dragon is named, and suddenly it's something that's in the water. In Job, it's not said it's something that's in the water.
Not
it's
necessarily.
maybe in the skies, maybe on the ground. It might be in the water. But then I think maybe there are different versions of this. You get a kind of dragon that can be underwater, in the sky, something like that. It's something to think about, but we don't really have proof for that here in the Bible.
Yeah, we start getting the question about which one is really right and which one is really wrong. But I think it's more of an idea that there might be different creatures with similar aspects and similar characteristics.
The Leviathan might be a group name. Like a dragon is also a group name for...
Yeah, and like you get wyvern, things like that as well. So it's quite interesting. The meaning of this verse, obviously, then is the psalmist wanted to say something about God being the one true king that brings peace and salvation. And even the Leviathan is submissive towards God. And perhaps we can just go back to Job as well. You start getting the question, isn't the Leviathan something that needs salvation from? Is it a good thing? Is it a good creature? Is it a bad creature? Or is it just such an overwhelmingly strong creature that no human can really stand towards it?
So if I can actually add something there, and something I would like to hear from you. Where is that now? Okay, so in Job 41, verse 22, it says, in his neck remaineth strength, and sorrow is turned into joy before him. Sadness is turned into happiness. So you come before him and you suddenly feel happy maybe, or it gives a sensation that it's just that one verse that's like, maybe this is something good. This creature is something good. It brings joy, it brings goodness. Might that be a way they saw these creatures in that time?
Yeah, it opens up a whole new idea of it. The whole time we get this idea of a creature that brings wrath and distraction. And
if you think of a dragon, yes.
And people run with fear when they see it, and suddenly it's described as something with joy from Job. And here we see again that it's something that we as humans need salvation from. Once again, you get that idea of a wrathful creature.
That's what I'm saying. There's
perhaps
a change.
Not. Yeah,
change between Job and Psalms.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. I think it's a long period afterwards that Psalms were written, and the stories were told and retold. And someone said this, and they started seeing these big creatures that breathe fire. So it must be bad. But in Job, it's not the feeling that is given, that is created.
Yeah.
Also, the thing about Psalm here, this verse that I just read, it's and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Gavest, he gave. I think it's similar in the other versions of the Bible, in the other translations.
He gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness.
So gave is past tense. In Job, it's talking about the creature, the Leviathan, and the Behemoth still living on earth. These are creatures that Job cannot just go out and kill this thing. But here in Psalms, it's talking about they have been killed already. So has there passed enough time that these creatures already became extinct or neared extinction in the time of Psalms?
It must have been. And once again, we get to the question again, when was Job written? When did Job happen? And then how many time might have passed? Are we looking at a few hundred years that this creature might have become extinct? And that's the idea we are given here, because in Job says that this creature can't be hunted. This creature can't be killed.
Can only be killed by the sword of God.
Only by the sword of God. And suddenly in Psalm we read that it has been slain and into pieces, and God gave this
meat.
meat to...
Yes, and then Job, it actually says it cannot be given as meat to humans. You cannot slay it, and you cannot sell it on the markets. And suddenly now it has been given as meat.
God could do it, and
so
only God can do it.
That's basically what extinction is for me. If I think about what extinction is or what this is, that sounds like extinction. Like recently, what's that animal that went extinct?
The black rhino.
The black rhino, yes. So the black rhino is actually fully extinct now, correct? The last one died. So it's not that far-fetched. In a few thousand years or a few hundred years even, an entire species can die out. In our lifetime, many species have died out. I think let's go on to the next psalm. It's 104 verse 26.
And there's a bit of similarities to the previous psalm as well, so listen closely.
I would actually like to hear what you think about this one. So, there go the ships, there is that Leviathan, whom thou hast made to play therein. So what can you say about that for me?
Yeah, if we look at why the whole book was written, throughout the book we get this idea of the writer is full of awe and wonder, and no different here. He's looking at God as the creator of everything, which of the Leviathan is one thing, and it's referred to as a thing that God plays with. So it's this wonderful and great creature, massively strong creature, and God plays with it. So it's hard to say exactly what the psalmist meant here, as we are not sure exactly who wrote it or when it was written, but it gives us still an idea of the message here as to how strong the Leviathan might have been, that they would have referred to it in this manner. And probably in a less literal sense, this might mean that it's a reference to God's almighty power.
But it doesn't go that much into depth about what the Leviathan is. It doesn't say specifically, okay, the Leviathan is this and this and this thing.
No.
So it's just more about praise to God. God is so big, he can play with the Leviathan or create the Leviathan to play in the sea or something. Then we can move on to the last part, the last place where the Leviathan is mentioned in the Bible, and that is Isaiah 27 verse 1. In that day the Lord with his sword and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan the piercing serpent, even Leviathan that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. So, okay, again it's mentioned here that Leviathan is in the sea, but again Isaiah must have been long after Job was written.
Yes.
Then the question is again, what did this creature actually exist and roam the earth in the time that Isaiah was written? Or is it just legend stories retold?
Probably not, as I guess it would have been written after the psalmist, but I could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure about that. Isaiah wrote a lot about things to come and the end of days, those sort of things. And possibilities of a savior to come and those sort of things. So the verse says that the day of judgment to come and the day the Lord intervenes, you will slay the Leviathan, which sort of begs the question again, but wasn't the Leviathan slain?
Because in the Psalms it says he
so-
gave it, yes, as
so
meat.
the timeline is not quite clear there, but it begs the question of, was the Leviathan slain or was it not? Is it more creatures? Perhaps there were still other creatures like that with similar. So we have a bit of question about the timeline there, and perhaps the psalmist wrote even after Isaiah, which I guess is possible. And this, in Isaiah, though, it's more reference to the end of days that God will defeat this Leviathan as if it's something that's evil, which sort of gets that metaphorical meaning again to, I don't know, something that takes control over humans or something that is harmful to humans, something like that.
But like I said earlier, listen to the change that happens from Job to Psalm to Isaiah. Did you actually catch that? It kind of started out like, this is fact. These creatures did exist. This is what these creatures look like. This is what they did. Like in the Bible, they don't really always go into specifics like that. This one is very, for me, they so very specifically say these are these creatures. And suddenly it turned to, oh, there was this creature. We know about this creature. It's this legend creature. It's big and strong and it must be evil and must be this. And then suddenly in Isaiah, it's this creature that it didn't live through, or maybe it lived throughout the earth, the time of earth throughout Job. But now it's a creature that will someday at the end of the world,
that sort of
then
things.
suddenly this big creature will come and it will reign over earth and be. That's the kind of feeling you get from this, and it's something that needs to be slain. It sounds like it's a story that's been retold hundreds, even thousands of years. It's been retold until is that telephone game where someone says something to someone else and then someone else and someone else. When it comes to the last person, it's not the same message as in the beginning. It sounds like that.
To give a bit of perspective, I mean, each book in the Bible is written in its own setting by an individual that is sometimes clear, sometimes not so clear. Isaiah, we knew by who it was written, but it was also different sources. You talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's about 40 of them, plus probably, all different sources that contributed to Isaiah. Really? So Isaiah has been written from I don't know how many different sources. It's not even just one source.
Isaiah sounds more for me like a historian that collected a bunch of stories and brought them together.
And
can that be?
Not just that. I think perhaps a collection of myths told and stories told and predictions made by different prophets, or the prophet Isaiah more specifically, and collection of all these things and all these information and things. So,
but you see, I don't get that feeling with Job. It doesn't feel like, oh, it's a collection of stories.
No. It's with a very specific intent. Job was written, and the psalmist, obviously, it was more like a lyrical form in a song, things like that. So it could be, but Job seems very factual about this, where in Isaiah it's much more a reference to something that might come, but you get that in the apocalyptic type books, like Isaiah, the specific
end of time, yes,
and you later get it in some other books in the Bible as well. So here it, and you see it, especially they refer to it here also as the Leviathan might be something like a serpent, a snake, like that. So you get this idea of...
But again, that's not said in Job. That's my problem.
Yes,
based on Job was the first time this is mentioned.
So Isaiah perhaps more metaphorically refers to it as a evil thing, maybe even Satan, and that God will slay Satan in a metaphorical sense, as a snake or as an evil being or a being that brings chaos to the world. So there's a whole gap between this and Job, definitely.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a few things I want to get your perspective on to wrap this up. What do you feel about the accuracy? If you need to sum up now, the accuracy of these stories.
Firstly, the the accuracy of Job, it makes it difficult to make a call on that. I truly believe that Job is in the Bible for a reason. It has a very good message for suffering and for different lessons people can learn about God and about a life in general.
And these are one of the times that God actually directly speaks.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not a retelling of it. God is actually there saying these things.
Yes, what makes it difficult is who the writer was. Perhaps it was quite a story that everyone told over and over. So everyone knew the story of Job, and someone just decided to transcribe the story and put it on paper. If it was Moses, who knows? But I guess it would depend on exactly when Job lived. So I don't think it questions the accuracy of Job. It just questions perhaps what sort of creature this might refer to, and perhaps even what if the reference was a more literal reference or a more metaphorical one.
Figurative, yes.
I think it's all questions that can be asked, but the way that Job is written, it seems that it's a bit more literal in the sense that this might have been a creature that was around. It was described in very great depth, and there's a lot of detail around this creature. So unless there was some amazing writer that time that was way before its time, thousands of years before its times, with this mythological creatures and this even if you look at the writing style of the apocalyptics, which only came hundreds of years, perhaps even thousands of years later,
which is a lot more metaphorical, symbolic.
Yes, and refers much more to the end time, which Job doesn't really tend to do so much. So it's hard to say that it was in a metaphorical sense, but the possibility is there.
All right, what about believability? Do you believe this? If you just read it, everything we just said, how do you believe it? On what level do you believe this, or at all?
The first time I read it, and I believe most people have felt this way, is it's not at all.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's this big.
It's crazy. It's like reading a book about dragons and things like that. It's like it seems really crazy, and then you start studying these things, and the more you read the book of Job, the more it seems like this could actually be possible. Why would someone do so much research about this thing and so much research about Job and all of his belongings and all of his family, which he was probably a well-known person in public, or I don't know, as he was quite wealthy. It just doesn't make sense to me that it would just be a book written by someone with no believability about it. The more I read it, the more I tend to think, but it must be true. And it must be true that this creature, this fire-breathing, flying creature perhaps, was actually there.
I think that's the reason for me, the purpose why we're starting off this series, talking about biblical figures, legends, creatures, because kind of you read these things the first time and you kind of gloss over it, like, oh, it's a bit of simile and metaphor. It just goes
by. And
so you read it like, oh, there's this crazy thing, but let's focus on the things that are logical, something like that. Like we said, the first time both of us, when we read it, it's like, yeah, okay, just move on. It's not even something I really thought about that much until we started researching this. Yeah. But now we are doing this series because we want to look at those things that actually, when you start looking at it, the first time you just kind of read over it, now looking at it, it's really important, and we start to see there are actually truths behind it, I think.
Yet it's so simple to believe that someone like Moses lived. Or that...
yeah, it's not really even debatable, I think. Or people don't really debate that. Why would you?
Yeah, and yet these things we just read over it like it's nothing.
Gloss over it, yes.
So perhaps I can end off by giving us the last part out of the Bible that's not directly linked here,
Mm-hmm.
and then gives something about the Apocrypha
Yeah.
that was also
Apocryphal
referred.
books, yes.
Yeah, that was also referred to this. So in Amos, it says that if they hide themselves on the top of Carmel, from there I will search them out and take them. And if they hide from my sight at the bottom of the sea, there I will command the serpent, and it shall bite them. So it links it to the serpent, but not to the Leviathan. But the Greek translation of the Septuagint used the same word as for the Leviathan,
which is
Dracona.
Dracona. All right, but
It's so it's quite interesting.
the thing is, it is strange for me because when I hear serpent, I think of the serpent with Adam and Eve, the snake, the lizard that lost his legs, the snake. Satan took on the form of the serpent. I don't think of the Leviathan. The Leviathan, this big kind of dragon-like thing, breathes fire.
Perhaps also more in a metaphorical sense as a creature that needs to be slain, like a evil creature, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe that was also the sense that it was written in. But it's a lot of things that might have been lost in translation. A lot of technical detail. I'm not quite sure that's really relevant. And then,
sorry, can I quickly ask? What about a spiritual? If we're talking, this starts to get a bit more metaphorical, maybe. What if these creatures are more a spiritual kind of creature, ethereal kind of creature? We were talking about the end times, the Leviathan comes, the serpent comes. The serpent is usually refers to Satan, but he's not physically a serpent. It's just like his metaphysical form, his spiritual form maybe. Can it be like it's a spiritual being that comes to earth that maybe we cannot always see?
I think it's important to at least ask the question around it, because it can be, because a lot of times sea is seen as a sense of chaos, and chaos is then referred to as sin, where chaos and sin is the opposite of what God wants us to do. And it gives us an idea of the creature of sin or the creature of chaos that needs to be slain. So in a metaphorical sense, definitely, I think there's some meaning to it, and I don't think you should simply push that meaning away, because it is seen as a creature that needs to be slain by God in a lot of these verses. I think it's important to note that God created this creature, as might be Satan, as a serpent perhaps, or as a creature of the sea, a creature of chaos, someone that brings chaos and brings sin to the world. And I think it gives a good metaphorical sense to it as well.
So I actually think after you said that at some part you need to read this as literal, this beast did exist, but then later you can use it as metaphorically. Like you would use, say, a lion. A lion is a physical, literal thing, but you can say, oh, he is as strong or is as brave as a lion. That's a simile metaphor kind of thing. So I think in some parts of the Bible it's more like a metaphor, more symbolic, but I do think these creatures did exist.
In certain sense, water is seen as washing your sin away, and in
On the one hand, yes.
And on this end it's seen as the sea is chaos, water is suddenly chaos and sin. So there is definitely a metaphorical sense, but you need to know the difference between the two, about washing sin away and water being sin, or sea being
again
chaos.
The same with the Leviathan, and in a lesser amount the Behemoth.
So in the book of Enoch, the Behemoth is the primal unconquerable monster of the land, as the Leviathan is the primal monster of the waters of the sea, and then the Zis is the primordial monster of the sky. You already see that idea of land and sky and sea, that sort of thing. And then, according to this text in Enoch, the Leviathan lives in the abyss,
which is the sea, the depths of the sea.
Which would be the depths of the sea, while the Behemoth is the land monster that lives in the invisible desert, which is east of the Garden of Eden.
You see, again, it's starting to get very symbolic imagery here, very storytelling.
Yeah, it's not... You see, a lot less detail here. It's just sort of this idea of a mythical monster somewhere in an invisible desert that no one is sure if it exists, and if it exists, where exactly it is.
And also now we get the Ziz, which is not even mentioned in the Bible as
Yeah.
far as I know.
Yeah.
These three, it's the heaven, the earth, and the water, the three main places on earth, obviously. And each one needs to have a creature. And it's very storytelling legends for me.
And just as reference, part of this, in later Jewish sources, the Leviathan is described as a dragon, and he lives in the sources of the deep, along with a male land monster, the Behemoth. So they are giving gender towards these monsters. The Behemoth is seen as male, where the Leviathan is seen as a female monster.
Why would that matter in the first place? It's not like they can mate or something.
I think that's the idea around these things, and that's what they wanted to say, that these monsters could mate and perhaps create another monster.
But they're also said to be opposing forces. The one would want to kill the other.
Yeah, it's very difficult to see exactly, because these sources are so scattered all over, and it's not quite clear what exactly the meaning of it was, neither what exactly they refer to. So it's just interesting to note that these actual sources of theology and Jewish origins was quite went into quite depth about all of the possibilities about these creatures.
Okay, then what is Tiamat? Tiamat is a word used alongside usually the Leviathan, isn't that?
Yes, that's true.
So it's just like a different name, like we would call it a dragon. It's also called Tiamat. But I saw something more specifically. It's used when it's talked about the Leviathan in the sea, in the depths of the sea. It's called kind of the Liamat, but Tiamat. Sorry,
Tiamat. Yeah, I think perhaps it would be just like as we can use Behemoth as a metaphorical way to refer to like a big creature, like an elephant. You can say, look at this. When you look at an elephant, you can just look at this behemoth of a creature. Just as that, you can say the same about the Leviathan.
All right, very good.
A Leviathan in the sea may be something like you refer to as a whale, a very large whale or something. Look at this Leviathan of a creature in the sea.
That literally breathes fire. You see, that's a big one.
It's
difficult for me.
It's just something about our language that isn't quite, and that's why I'm saying that things can be lost in translation, because we talk about something like an elephant as a behemoth of a creature, just as we can say a whale is. But
it came from this word.
Obviously, it can refer to a specific creature that lived in that time that perhaps we don't have here today.
All right. Well, I feel a lot more confident about the story now. I know a lot more about it, I think. I hope you guys also have a lot more knowledge.
I feel much more confident of hopefully someday seeing a dragon.
Chances are there now.
Absolutely.
As long as we find his cave with all his gold and...
I wouldn't mind.
All right. So please, guys, if you can go ahead and comment, please let us know what you think about this. Let's have a conversation about it. We do get back to all our comments. We do talk to people about this. We might actually even have another video if you bring up something interesting. Also, remember, this is a series about legends and figures and beasts and all those kinds of things in the Bible. If you have any ideas, any thing you want to talk about or want us to talk about, any kind of creature or legend, please comment it, send us a message on Patreon or Twitter, on YouTube, and we will get back to you. We will consider that, and we have a whole list of things we want to talk about. But
even some of the more prominent figures in the Bible, if there's something you want us to talk about, give us a shout.
Yeah, so go ahead and give us an idea what you want to hear. And thank you guys for watching. This was very interesting for me. And thank you, Klaus.
I hope you enjoyed it just as much as we did.
All right.